Hello everyone and welcome to another video. The year is 1982. Peter Davison is embarking on his first season as the brand new Fifth Doctor. He has quite a lot to live up to, as his immediate predecessor Tom Baker had played the fourth Time Lord for a record-breaking 7 years. In that time, viewers had grown so accustomed to Baker's witty bohemian portrayal that some of them could barely even remember any of the Doctors that came before him. Tom Baker had basically become the definitive Doctor Who to millions of viewers, and still remains so for many people over 40 years later, from a 1982 perspective I mean. It's fair to say that Davison has a big challenge being Tom Baker's successor, but fortunately for him and for the programme, he would more than rise up to the challenge, and win over many viewers and fans with his youthful, more measured take on the character. Producer John Nathan Turner would be proven to have been right to cast Davison, as the Fifth Doctor would be essentially the total opposite of the Fourth, and this would help steer the show and the titular character into a new direction after Baker's departure. But the production team hadn't always been so sure that a new Doctor would be needed for that year's season 19. Initially, while some of the previous season 18 had been filmed, they had thought that Tom Baker might very well stay on for yet another year, which would have been his 8th overall. It was only whilst Full Circle was in production that Baker decided that season 18 would be his last. But this begs the question, what if things had gone differently? What if, in an alternate timeline, the Fourth Doctor's era had been even longer? What if Tom Baker had stayed for season 19? Now, I should start this off by saying that it is very unlikely that Tom Baker would have stayed on for another year. There were various issues that cropped up behind the scenes during the production of season 18. From Tom Baker getting ill at the start of its production, to relationship issues between him and Lalla Ward, as well as Baker not really approving of the new direction producer John Nathan Turner was taking the show in. It really wasn't a happy time for Tom Baker, and that kind of shows in his performance throughout the season. So the chances of him deciding to stay on for another year after experiencing all of that, pretty slim to be honest. But we'll say that he stays on anyway. He always enjoyed playing the parts anyway, so maybe that will be some consolation for him, and maybe his relationship with John Nathan Turner improves, leading to Baker wanting to work with him for another year. But now that all the behind-the-scenes stuff has been covered, how exactly would this affect the more in-universe side of things? Well, there's two ways it could go. First is that Logopolis stays more or less the same up until towards the end. The Fourth Doctor somehow doesn't end up falling from a great height. Perhaps he's still dangling on the cable, dangerously close to falling, when Adric, Nyssa and Tegan manage to get up the dish. Adric could probably pilot the TARDIS to the control room in a desperate bid to save the Doctor. This would be the first time Adric attempted to do such a thing, but it's worth noting that he would later attempt to pilot it in the Visitation with mixed results. So we'll say that whilst he still wouldn't be great at it, he and the others would be able to land just before the Doctor loses his grip. They then pull him to safety, and the four of them quickly leg it back to the TARDIS. The second option is that the last two stories of season 18 will be completely different, so not Keeper of Traken and Logopolis. This is probably the more likely one, as both stories, as well as Castrovalva, were intentionally written to bridge the transition from Tom Baker to a new Doctor. Now yes, it is possible that they could still go ahead with these stories when they thought Baker would be leaving, only for him to change his mind at the last minute and stay on for another year anyway, but it would be good to make these two options very different from each other, as, well, it just makes the whole scenario arguably a lot more interesting. But let's properly examine both options in more detail, starting with the first one. With Logopolis still being the final story of season 18, just with the Fourth Doctor surviving its events, I can imagine that season 19 then plays out mostly the same as it did in our timeline. The only real change I would make would be to not have Time Flight as season 19's last story, as, well, let's be honest, it would make for a pretty rubbish final story for the Fourth Doctor. So instead we swap that and Earthshock around, with Thor then regenerating after he is shot by the Cyber Leader in the TARDIS. Adric might still potentially die on the freighter, although it might seem to be a bit too much to have both a Doctor and companion die in just one story. So maybe Adric would stay on for at least the first few stories of the following season, with him deciding to go with the others in the escape pod, instead of staying behind to finish his sums. Pete Davison would probably still be the Fifth Doctor, as J&T would still be inspired to cast him after working with Davison on All Creatures Great and Small. And his first story would now be Time Flight, which wouldn't be a great start to his era, but never mind. Time Flight could either still be the last story for season 19, and therefore be similar to Twin Dilemma in terms of the Doctor's introduction at the end of the previous incarnation's final season, or it could be moved to the beginning of season 20 and serve as its first story. Given that J&T didn't decide to have Davison's first story tacked onto the end of Baker's final season in our timeline, it's probably safe to say that he does the same in this alternate scenario. I've just realised while saying that last bit that, well, it doesn't really make much sense, because 1 minute I'm saying that I'm swapping Earthshock and Time Flight around in terms of the order that they would be shown in for season 19, but then next minute I'm saying that Time Flight would be Davison's first story. So basically I'm going to split option 1 into 2 further options, so options 1.2, 1.1 or 1.2, something like that. So anyway, yeah, so the first option for option 1, this is going to get really confusing, is that it's literally what I said at the beginning. Earthshock and Time Flight are swapped around, so therefore Time Flight is with the Fourth Doctor, and then Earthshock sees the Fourth Doctor regenerates into the Fifth. Now, option 1.2, as you could call it, would be to basically have Earthshock still be Thor's final story, and then either Time Flight is tucked onto the end of season 19 as Davison's first story. Maybe J&T decides that, it's not fair for Davison's first year to be for his first story to be during an anniversary year, so maybe that's why Time Flight gets moved to season 19. Or alternatively, you could just have Arc of Infinity as Davison's first story, and Time Flight is a Fourth Doctor story, and then we get Earthshock, and then Arc of Infinity, in that order, if that makes sense. So yeah, apologies that what I said originally for all of this was, well, it kind of got a bit confusing as I said one thing 1 minute, then said the other the next. But yeah, let's get on to the second proper option now, where season 18's final 2 stories are completely different. How about the second option, where season 18's final 2 stories are very different? Well, we'll have to look to some unmade stories for alternate options. Looking at the unmade storylines submitted or proposed for seasons 18 and 19, how about Ferrera Nohan, probably said that wrong, by Andrew Stevenson, and Mark of Lumos by Keith Miles. Sadly, not much is known about these storylines, but hopefully they would finish season 18 off well enough. Tegan would still need to be introduced in one of these stories, perhaps Mark of Lumos, as it will be the final story for season 18, just like Logopolis was for us. Then, for season 19, we would need another unmade story to replace Castrovalva at the very start. How about Cycrons by Terence Greer, even if it's another unmade story that we don't know much about. But the majority of season 19 beyond that would still be the same as what we got. We'd still have Fort Doomsday, Hinder, The Visitation, Black Orchids, and Earthshock. Adric would still be killed off in a latter story. And then, to finish off the season, we'd have The Enemy Within by Christopher Priest. The behind-the-scenes drama between Priest and producer John Nathan Turner would need to not happen in this alternate timeline in order for this to work. This would end the Fourth Doctor's tenure on a very subdued note after he has to face his fears within the heart of the TARDIS thanks to some characters called the Time Rights. Regardless of which option we choose to go with, there would obviously be a sizable knock-on effect on the remainder of the classic series run. Davison's era would now last from seasons 20 to 22. Colin Baker's would be from The Twin Dilemma, which would now be at the end of season 22, to the end of season 24. And then McCoy would have seasons 25 to 27. The stories would stay the same for those seasons though, although maybe we'd have Time Flight at the start of season 20 to serve as Davison's first story. Or maybe, like I said earlier, Arc of Infinity would be fine being his introduction instead, with a few changes and rewrites, such as Tegan never being left behind. Anyway, this would all then mean that the show now gets cancelled a year later in 1990, with season 27's final story, whether that be Blood and Iron or Elyxian, serving as an unintended finale for the show's classic era. But as nice as it might have been to have the Fourth Doctor staying on for another year, and an extra year is probably as far as it would have most likely gone, it's probably for the best that we didn't. Tom Baker had a great 7 years playing the part. Sure, some of those years might be more beloved among fans than others, but the Fourth Doctor remains the one ever constant throughout all the changes that occurred both in front of and behind the camera during that time. Having him stay on for an 8th year might potentially have felt like he was outstaying his welcome a little. Tom Baker was already getting a bit long in the tooth and facing difficulties working on the show during his 7th year, so having another year of that might not have been the best thing for him on a personal level. But it was interesting to think about what could have been if he had decided to do another year after all. So there we have it, there's my take on what if Tom Baker had stayed for season 19, and what is pretty much the final proper video in my What If Every Doctor Had Stayed for Another Year series, for the time being at least. But what do you think? Do you agree with my take on it or not? And would you have done anything differently? Please let me know in the comments section below. Anyway, so thanks for watching, I hope you liked it. Please don't forget to press that subscribe button below, as well as press the bell icon at the side of it, so that you'll stay notified of when all my new videos come out. And I shall see you all in another video. So, until next time, bye bye!